federal government for their funding for this on this occasion.
In accordance with Standing Order 43, the time for members' statements has concluded. We give the call to the Acting Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I inform the House that the member for Hotham will be absent from question time today and tomorrow, and questions relating to the Home Affairs portfolio will be answered by the member for Isaacs.
Questions without notice. And I give the call to the member for Flinders.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Yesterday, the Treasurer refused to rule out changes to franking credits and negative gearing. Will the Treasurer rule out changes to taxes on superannuation?
Give the call to the Treasurer.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for her question. And I'm pleased to inform the House that on the question that they've asked me today and yesterday, our position hasn't changed on the matter of taxes. Our priority is to do something meaningful about multinational taxes. We've said that for some time now, and that's our agenda when it comes to tax. But it's a good opportunity, Mr Speaker. I'm asked about tax policy. It's a good opportunity to inform the House that today the member for Hume gave a little speech about tax. He gave a little speech about tax at the Centre for Independent Studies, and I'm asked about tax. And what I notice, or what I'm told, from this steaming little pile of Thatcherite rubbish, plucked straight from the yellowing pages of a Young Liberal newsletter in the 1980s, was that the member for Hume and the question about tax, they want to give us a lecture on tax. Well, Mr Speaker,
Order. Treasurer
have a seat.
Treasurer resume his seat. When the House comes to order, I'll ask the manager to rise on a point of order.
Well, Mr Speaker, on relevance, I would ask that you follow the tradition of Speaker Jenkins, well-respected Labor Speaker Jenkins, and direct the minister to relate his material to the question at hand. If he said all he's going to say on the question, he should sit down, Mr Speaker.
The Treasurer was asked about tax policy regarding franking credits, negative gearing and superannuation. I draw him to the last part of the question and give the call to the Treasurer.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. So we got a lecture on taxes today from the mob, who were the second highest taxing government in the last 30 years, the highest taxing government since John Howard's government, from a party that just voted against a tax cut on cars in this place in the last couple of weeks. We didn't just get a lecture on taxes, Mr Speaker, we got a lecture on the cost of living from the mob that kept wages deliberately low for a decade, and from a shadow treasurer who tried to keep secret a 20% increase in electricity prices. We got a lecture on debt from the mob that doubled the debt even before the pandemic and left us with rising interest costs on the $1 trillion in debt that they left behind. And we got a lecture on productivity from the same people who gave us the worst decade of productivity in the last 50 years, Mr Speaker. Now, I don't know what's more concerning, Mr Speaker, that the shadow treasurer might not be the sharpest tool in the Liberal Party's shed, or that he might be the sharpest tool in the Liberal Party's shed. Only in a Liberal Party this bereft of ideas and talent would the member for Hume even get a look in a serious economic portfolio. So we won't be copying lectures, Mr Speaker, from the leftovers of the last government, not on tax, not on spending, not on borrowing, not on the cost of living, not from the dregs of a government which presided over a wasted decade of missed opportunities and messed up priorities, and which left us a mess that will take more than one budget to clean up.
Order. The member for Groom. Give the call to the member for Tangney.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. What is the outlook for the global economy, and what impact does this have on Australia's economy and on our budget?
Give the call to the Treasurer.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Can I thank the member for Tangney, not just for the question, but really for the quite remarkable spirit that he brings to this place. And I know that I speak for everyone on this side when I say what an honour it is to serve with the member for Tangney, and I appreciate his question today. In between the Parliament rising at the end of this week and it returning at the end of October, I'll be heading to Washington, D.C. for a short trip to confer with my international counterparts about the difficult and dark days that lie ahead for the global economy. And last night, the OECD showed in pretty stark detail the downturn that they are anticipating in the world economy, with substantial downgrades to the growth outlook for almost all of the world's major economies and almost all of our major trading partners as well. Now, for the benefit of the House, the OECD has wiped 0.6 percentage points off the global growth projection for 2023. It's predicting no growth at all for the UK next year, negligible growth in the United States and slower growth in China than previously expected. Now, the factors contributing to this aren't a secret to anyone: intensifying inflationary pressures, escalating energy security shocks, Russia's illegal war becoming more entrenched, and extreme uncertainty over the future. And here in Australia we do have things going for us that will help us withstand the worst of what we're confronting in the global economy. But these global challenges are deepening, not disappearing, and there's no use pretending that they won't be felt here in some form, and the OECD has touched on that too. And there's no avoiding the reality that the economy we inherited isn't as resilient as it could be to help us through these shocks, nor is the budget as well placed as it needs to be either. Now, these are the costs and consequences of that wasted decade that Australians are paying the price for now, with falling real wages and flatlining productivity, a budget heaving with $1 trillion of debt without an economic dividend to show for it. And this combination of challenges is the backdrop for the budget that we will hand down from this place at the end of next month. We will provide cost-of-living relief in that budget, which is responsible, which isn't counterproductive, in areas like cheaper childcare, which those opposite have still not told us whether they support or not. We need to start investing in the potential of our people and the capacity of our economy, fee-free TAFE, cheaper and cleaner energy and a future made in Australia. And we will begin trimming some of the waste that was a hallmark of the budgets handed down by the previous government. Now, this is just the beginning, Mr Speaker, not the end of our work to build the better future that Australians deserve. It will take multiple budgets and it will involve some hard choices. But despite everything that's been thrown at us, Australians have every reason to be optimistic about the long-term prospects of our economy and our country, but we've got some tricky terrain to navigate together in the meantime.
Give the call to the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Acting Prime Minister. Since the government was elected, Australians are paying an extra $700 a month on an average mortgage. Record inflation is forcing them to pay more for less at the supermarket, and desperate families are still waiting for a $275 cut to their power bills, a promise Labor repeated 97 times before the election, but not once since. Acting Prime Minister, when Labor talks about bread-and-butter budgets, is it because that's all Australians are going to be able to afford this Christmas?
Order. There is far too much noise on my right. I give the call to the Acting Prime Minister.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for her question. We do understand that rising interest rates are putting real pressure on the budgets of Australian households, and this government sees as its first priority doing everything we can to ease that pressure. It's why we sought an increase in the minimum wage. It's why during this week we are introducing legislation which will reduce the cost of medicines, which will make childcare more affordable. It's why last week we saw the biggest increase in the pension in more than 10 years. So on this side of the House, we're completely focused on the effort to improve the household budgets of every Australian. But the issues that we face today are fundamentally a function of a lost decade of government offered by those opposite. I mean, we had insipid productivity growth which defined the last 10 years. We had the greatest period of wage stagnation in our country's history. And that's a direct result of the fact that what we had opposite was a bunch of economic bystanders. It was a lost decade of economic activity when it came from those opposite. We are different. We are the ones who are economic managers, and government under Labor will see economic management be a part of what we are about, and we will do that in a way which will improve the budgets of households as a result.
I give the call to the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, seeking to table a document.
I seek leave to table a document.
Proceed.
I seek leave to table a document titled The Economic Impact of the ALP's Powering Australia Plan, authored by Repitex Energy, modelling the Prime Minister's claims to stand by his promise of a $275 cut to power bills.
Is leave granted?
You can't table the internet. It's already publicly available.
The Leader will resume his seat. I give the call. Order. Members on my left, when the House comes to order, we'll hear a question from the member for Reid.
My question is to the Acting Prime Minister. How is the Albanese Labor government delivering on its promise to establish a National Anti-Corruption Commission?
The call to the Acting Prime Minister.
Well, can I thank the member for Reid for her question, and can I congratulate her on her victory at the election, her wonderful first speech. We are so much the better for having her as a member of our team. Social media and the internet has completely changed our lives. We've seen information spread around the world today in a way we would barely have been able to imagine 30 years ago. But so has misinformation. And what that has done has undermined a sense of the objective truth, which in turn has put unprecedented pressure on democracies. And so there has never been a more important time for measures which build public confidence in government, in what we do, and in the standards of probity and ethics which guide our behaviour. Tomorrow, the Albanese government will introduce into this parliament a bill to establish an anti-corruption commission at a federal level. It's a long time coming. It should be bipartisan. Those opposite promised to deliver it. But in the last 3 years of their government, not a word of legislation was presented to this House. Now, the bill that we will introduce tomorrow will provide for a commission with teeth, with independent powers of investigation. It will require the Commission to act with due process, but in the process it will increase the standards of ethics and probity for all public officials at a federal level. And as we all know, the Commonwealth is the only jurisdiction in the country which does not have an anti-corruption commission, despite the fact that the Commonwealth is the largest and most consequential jurisdiction in the Federation. Now, this legislation is going to provide an opportunity for every member of this House to pin their colours to the mast as to where they stand on the question of probity and ethics in government. And can I say, on the Labor side, we really look forward to that opportunity, because tomorrow will be the culmination of 4 years of campaigning. And I know that for members on the government side, and indeed those on the front bench, this issue goes to the very heart of the compact of trust that they have with their own constituency. Labor understands that to defend democracy around the world, we need to start by building the resilience of our democracy at home. And the establishment of an anti-corruption commission will do exactly that.
Order. I give the call to the member for Mackellar.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is for the Attorney-General. Is the Attorney-General able to give confidence to the Australian people that the National Anti-Corruption Commission will be set up to succeed by including a strong statutory oversight mechanism that is not government-dominated in order to protect its independence?
Give the call to the Attorney-General.
I thank the member for Mackellar for her question, and as the parliament has just heard from the Acting Prime Minister, there will be legislation in the House tomorrow to establish a National Anti-Corruption Commission. It is a major piece of reform to Australia's integrity framework, and as I'd hope everyone's aware, I've consulted across the parliament, including with the opposition and the crossbench in both houses, on the formation of this legislation. The Australian people believe in integrity, the Australian people voted for a government which will deliver a powerful, transparent and independent National Anti-Corruption Commission. On the specific question of oversight of the Commission, when the bill is introduced tomorrow, members will see that it will have a joint statutory committee with senators and members of this House who will act as an oversight committee for the activities of the National Anti-Corruption Commission. Members will also see, when the bill is introduced tomorrow, that there will be an inspector of the Commission who will perform a similar role to the role that's performed by inspectors in the states and territories which have included that aspect in their anti-corruption arrangements.
Give the call to the member for order. Give the call to the member for Wills.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Home Affairs. The cyber attack on Optus and theft of personally identifiable Australian customer data is of great concern. Can the Minister update the House on the breach and the steps being taken to protect the privacy of Australians' data?
Give the call to the Minister representing the Minister for Home Affairs and Minister for Cybersecurity, the Attorney-General.
So I thank the member for Wills for his question. Australians expect that when they hand over their personal data, every effort will be made to keep it safe from harm. We know that millions of Australians have been impacted by the Optus data breach, and it is a data breach which should never have happened. It involved the release of Australian citizens' names, date of birth, phone numbers, email addresses, residential addresses and, for some customers, passport numbers and driver's licence numbers being apparently for sale on the dark web. We were concerned this morning about reports that personal information from the Optus data breach apparently also includes Medicare numbers. Medicare numbers were never notified as forming part of the breach. And I can say that Optus has a clear obligation to notify affected customers, affected individuals, which of course includes both past customers of Optus and present customers of Optus. Optus has a clear obligation to notify both the affected individuals and the Australian Information Commissioner when a data breach involving personal information is likely to result in serious harm. Consumers have also got a right to know exactly what individual personal information has been compromised in Optus's communications to them. While we will, of course, not go into the technical assistance and cybersecurity advice that is being provided to Optus, we can reassure Australians that the whole of the Australian government is working to address the consequences of this breach. In particular, the Australian Federal Police is devoting huge effort with a large number of officers working on this. The Australian Federal Police is working with industry, working with state and territory police forces and also working with the FBI to address the consequences of this breach.
Give the call to the member for Hume.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, my question is to the Treasurer. I refer to the confirmation that the Parliamentary Budget Office from the Parliamentary Budget Office that Labor is committed to an additional $18 billion of spending over the estimates and $45 billion of additional balance sheet spending. What new taxes will the Treasurer introduce in order to pay for this and other new spending?
The member for Hume will resume his seat. There is far too much noise. I could not hear the question from the member for Hume. I'll ask him to read the question again. Oh, no. I couldn't hear the question, and the House will come to order, and the member for Hume will be heard in silence.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. I refer to the confirmation from the Parliamentary Budget Office that Labor has committed to additional spending of over $18 billion over the forward estimates and $45 billion of additional balance sheet spending. What new taxes will the Treasurer introduce in order to pay for this and other new spending?
Give the call to the Treasurer.
Well, thanks very much, Mr Speaker. The member for Hume must have been listening to the answer I provided a few minutes ago in response to his colleague at the outset of question time. Now, if the member for Hume, the Shadow Treasurer, is just now, after 4 months in office, getting a head around the commitments that we took to the Australian people in May of this year and won the election on, then he's even slower on the uptake than we feared, Mr Speaker, because we took a whole bunch of commitments to the election. And many of the commitments that we took to the election are all about making up for the fact that over this wasted decade of missed opportunities and messed up priorities, there hasn't been the investment that we need to see in training, and that's why we've got these rampant labour and skills shortages holding back the economy. There hasn't been the investment that we wanted to see in working parents, and that's why we've needed to introduce today the childcare legislation that those opposite can't support, even though it will be a game-changer for Australian parents and for Australian families and the Australian economy more broadly. Now, we're proud of the commitments that we took to the election. We're proud of the responsible investments that we proposed to the Australian people for cleaner and cheaper energy and a better trained workforce and cheaper childcare and all of the things that have made necessary by the economic failures of those opposite over the best part of a decade that they spent trying to push people's wages down and making it harder and harder to make ends meet. Now, our position on the economy, our position on taxes, our position on the commitments we took to the election haven't changed. We will tally them up in the budget next month in the usual way and will present it from this place. And in that budget that I will be proud to hand down on behalf of the Albanese government, we will make some of the investments that the economy has been crying out for some time. We will make responsible changes to the spending, to the money that they sprayed around en route to delivering $1 trillion in debt with nowhere near enough to show for it. And I tell you, I hope, Mr Speaker, Mr Speaker, that the author of that steaming little pile of Thatcherite platitudes today, I hope he continues to ask me questions about the cost of living, they having chased down wages for a decade, about tax. On their watch, Mr Speaker, their tax record was to hand down more taxes. He asked me about taxes, Mr Speaker.
Order.
Their record over 10 years in office.
Resume his seat. The member for Hume will raise a point of order and then resume his seat.
Relevance, Mr Speaker. The question was what new taxes—
Resume your seat. The Treasurer is completely in order. It was a broad-ranging question regarding taxes and additional spending. I call the Treasurer.
Mr Speaker, I think that camera must have a mirror in it, the way that the member for— He's always looking down the barrel of that mirror, Mr Speaker, which is not a surprise to anyone in this place. Now, if he wants to ask me about tax, Mr Speaker, he should come to the dispatch box and he should fess up to a decade of the second highest taxing government in the last 30 years, the highest since Howard, where taxes were higher under them per capita, in total, per year, every way you want to cut the tax record of those opposite. He can deliver speech after speech after speech plagiarised from a Liberal Party newsletter in the 1980s. All he likes. That won't change that basic fact.
Give the call to the member for Jagga Jagga.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Early Childhood Education. How will the Albanese Labor government's cheaper childcare plan improve access to affordable early childhood education and care and ease cost of living pressures?
I give the call to the Minister for Early Childhood Education and the Minister for Youth.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Jagga Jagga for her question. I know that the member has a very strong focus on cost of living pressures for families in Jagga Jagga and a very strong interest in early childhood education. And rightly so, Mr Speaker, because early childhood education and care plays a vital role in supporting families and improves the education and wellbeing outcomes for Australian children. And boosting access to early childhood education and care ensures that more children are able to access the benefits of foundational learning during those most formative years, preparing them for a life of exploration and learning. And this morning, Mr Speaker, I had the absolute pleasure of visiting Mocha Childcare Centre in Manuka with the member for Canberra, Alicia Payne, and with the Minister for Education, Jason Clare. And we got to meet some of the most adorable little children you will ever meet in your life, like little Amara and little Anna. And we got to see for ourselves and watch these children as they learned through play, which is what early childhood education is all about. But we also got to speak to parents like Sam, Anna's dad, who told us how the cost of early childhood education is putting that early childhood education, that vital education in those early years, out of reach for a lot of parents, and is acting as a disincentive for primary caregivers, who are mostly women, to take on more hours of work if they want to, or to get back to work if they want to. And that's why the Labor government took to the election a plan for cheaper childcare, and why today we have acted on our election commitment and introduced a bill in parliament to reduce out-of-pocket costs for parents for early childhood education and care. And this reform, Mr Speaker, will benefit over 1 million families across Australia, over 1 million families in electorates like Jagga, in electorates like Cowan, right across every state and territory in this country. A part of our commitment is to address the cost of living and make early childhood education and care more accessible and affordable, and we'll be tasking the ACCC with looking at pricing. These reforms aren't just about affordability. They're about our most precious asset, our children, and providing our children with the care and the education that they need in their formative years to set them up for life.
Order. I give the call to the member for McPherson.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Acting Prime Minister, and it concerns the Optus data breach. On ABC 7:30 last night, the Minister for Home Affairs said, "What is of concern for us is how what is quite a basic attack was undertaken on Optus." The Optus CEO this morning said, "It's not as portrayed. Our data was encrypted and we have multiple layers of protection." Does your government maintain that the Optus breach was quite a basic attack?
I give the call to the Acting Prime Minister. Members on my right will cease interjecting. I give the call to the Acting Prime Minister.
Well, I thank the member for her question on what is a very serious matter and one that is causing anxiety for millions of Optus customers today. And the truth is that what has occurred over the last week has been a wake-up call for corporate Australia. From the moment last Wednesday that it became clear that a breach had occurred, the government, through the Australian Cyber Security Centre and the Australian Signals Directorate, has been working hand in glove with Optus, with a view to minimising the impact of the breach but maximising the protection of the customers who have found their privacy breached as a result of what has occurred. And we continue to work with Optus to make sure that that protection can be maximised. The Australian Federal Police right now are doing everything within their power to pursue the criminal investigation. But what's really important for those Optus customers is the steps that they take now in terms of their own security. It is really important that people do not click on links. It is really important that people check the sources of websites. And it's really important that in having phone conversations, people do not divulge their personal information unless they are 100% confident about the circumstances in which that conversation is happening. Now, we will be continuing to work very closely with Optus and indeed other companies in the telecommunications sector and other sectors within the economy, including the banks, to make sure that we can do everything to minimise the impact of what has been a very concerning event. But it has been a wake-up call for corporate Australia, and I know now that cyber security is right there in the top echelon of issues which face corporate Australia, as it does government, of course. and we need to be doing everything we can to make sure that protection is in place, and that will be the entire focus of this government.
Give the call to the member for Robertson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Indigenous Affairs. How will the Albanese Labor government's cheaper childcare plan get more Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children into early education and help to close the gap?
Give the call to the Minister for Indigenous Australians.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I want to thank the member for Reid for his question, and it's an honour to serve with the member for Reid. I worked for many years as a school teacher. I've also been a member of the board of an Aboriginal preschool called Marawina in Mount Druitt. And I know how important it is for children to be ready for school. It is crucial in helping them thrive in the classroom and beyond. Yesterday, at an international conference on education, there were 2,500 people in Adelaide. I had the great pleasure of announcing that all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children will be able to access 36 hours of subsidised childcare a fortnight from July 2023. That's 3 to 4 days of preschool. These changes will benefit over 6,000 families. 6,000. Importantly, they will encourage more Indigenous families to access early education and care, which is a desperate and important need in this country. It will improve Djadjam's readiness for school. The term Djadjams is a very significant word in North Coast Aboriginal languages for babies and young people, and that's what I intend to use. School readiness is an important closing the gap target, and it's an area where we went backwards last year. This target is going backwards, and this measure will address that closing the gap target. And it's an area where we went backwards, as I said. We know that Djadjams are underrepresented in early childhood education, and high-quality early childhood education and care is critical to supporting children's development and future success. I am not telling anyone in this chamber anything. Our plan is good for children, it's good for families, and it's good for the economy, and it's good for education in Australia. Of course, it's essential all governments work together, and we will. There's also the announcement yesterday of a $10.2 million support to support a new early childhood education, care and development policy partnership. This is in partnership with SNAIC, and it is going to close one of those important gaps. This will put Aboriginal children on the path to a life of choice and chance.
Give the call to the member for Cowper.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Regional Development, Local Government and Territories. Can the minister guarantee that the government will not cut $143 million out of regional education infrastructure funded in the 2022 budget? Specifically, will the government support the $27.5 million in regional development funding for the Southern Cross University Coffs Harbour Health Services Precinct?
Yeah. The call to the Minister for Regional Development, Local Government and Territories.
Thank you very much for the question. As you're aware, we are doing a secondary budget, which isn't something that's normal as part of the government process. But when we came into government, there was $1 trillion in debt and a range of programs.
Order.
A range of programs.
The minister will resume her seat. Order. With 11 seconds into the answer, I call the member for Cowper on a point of order.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Point of order. Relevance. It was a very specific question.
Resume your seat. You just need to simply state the point of order. I call the minister 11 seconds in. I'll be listening closely to her answer to make sure she is relevant, but I'll allow her 11 seconds in to get on with her answer. I call the minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. As I was saying, we have come into government after a decade of those opposite and are reviewing the processes that the previous government went through, including announcing a range of projects that weren't contracted, sometimes where money wasn't asked for, and we are in that process of reviewing that at this point in time. We will put forward our own proposals going forward, and that project may form part of that. But there is a budget coming up in October, and I ask the member to pay close attention to what that budget says.
Order. I give the call to the honourable member for Patterson.
Thanks, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Regional Development. What are the Albanese Labor government's plans to support our regions, and how does this differ from what we inherited
Members
from the
on
former
my
government?
left. Yeah. Order. Members on my left. I give the call to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government.
Thank you very much, and I'm delighted to answer that question from the member for Patterson, a fantastic regional member. On this side of the House, we're deeply committed to the economic productivity of our regions, and of course, in the lead-up to the election, we announced a range of policies across government that we will be investing in our regions. In my own portfolio, $200 million for the Kennedy Highway, roads for the Tanami, funding for the Tanami, Stewart and Augusta highways, $80 million for roadside facilities to support interstate truck drivers, $200 million for the Bruce Highway between Rockhampton and Gladstone, the Nowra Bypass, Shoalhaven roads, a new university campus in Cairns, a hangar so that the Royal Flying Doctor Service can respond across all of northern Tasmania, funding for Stage 2 of the Gippsland Logistics Precinct, Muswellbrook Civic Precinct upgrade and the Mackay Electric Vehicle and Energy Training Centre. More broadly across government, Minister Bowen has the Powering the Regions Fund to help our regional economies and our regional industries actually take up the opportunities of renewable energy. Housing, we have the Housing Minister with the Regional First Home Buyer scheme to investing in helping young Australians in our regions get their first homes. Our Central Australia plan, investing in roads, digital connectivity, the environment, cultural heritage, skills training, health and crime prevention in the very heart of our nation. $250 million top-up to the local community roads and infrastructure program, specifically for regional and rural roads, which complements our ongoing commitments for programs like Roads to Recovery, the Bridges Renewal Program and the Black Spots Program. It stands in stark contrast to what these people did opposite when they were in government. They took a very different approach. From reports today, we see the incredible lack of transparency, the pork barrelling that actually happened out of the community development grants. We saw one project is a $25 million grant to a company that's 70% owned in the Cayman Islands. We've been left to clean up this absolute mess of pork-barrelled rules. We've seen 9 projects that date back to 2016, 6 projects where there's no proponent, over $18 million of projects where there's no actual location for a project. We've had the member for New England, the previous minister, write to the Treasurer about 2 projects that he awarded to himself, of which there is no actual record of any decision being made. This is the mess that you've left for us. I am very proud of our record in regional Australia on this side. We are investing in the regions. We'll continue to do so instead of the pork barrelling that was actually categorised by the last government, and we're going to clean up this mess.
Order. When the House comes to order, I'll give the call to the member for Curtin.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is for the Attorney-General. Public hearings are an essential part of a credible anti-corruption commission to rebuild trust in government. You've indicated that public hearings will only be held in exceptional circumstances. Why is the government setting the bar this high instead of whenever it's in the public interest, and what are exceptional circumstances?
Give the call to the Attorney-General.
I thank the member for Curtin for her question, and I thank her for her interest, along with the rest of the crossbench and indeed the whole of the parliament, in this very important piece of legislation that we're going to be introducing tomorrow. The particular question that has been asked by the member for Curtin goes to the circumstances in which the Commission will be able to hold public hearings. The most important part of this is that the Commission will have power to hold public hearings. That will be when there are exceptional circumstances in the opinion of the Commission and where it's in the public interest to do so, in the opinion of the Commission. There are a number of factors outlined in the bill which the Commission may consider before deciding to hold a public hearing, and it is appropriate, in the view of the government, that the discretion sits with the Commission. We are not going to be directing the Commission as to when it should hold private hearings and when it should hold public hearings, but I think all of those in this House would be aware that there will be a number of circumstances which will dictate against holding a public hearing. It might be that the subject matter of the investigation is concerned with national security information, or it might be that the subject matter of the investigation deals with matters that are either the subject of a current criminal trial or a projected criminal trial. Now, all of those are going to be matters that would suggest to the Commission that no public hearing should be held at a particular time, but a time may come later in the investigation when a public hearing is going to be appropriate. But at all times, we think that this matter should be left to the discretion of the Commission.
Give the call to the member for Fraser.
My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Women. How will the Albanese Labor government's commitment to implement all of the Respect at Work recommendations support women's economic equality?
Good question.
Give the call to the Minister representing the Minister for Women and the Minister for Indigenous Australians.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I thank the member for Fraser for asking this extremely important question, and I know that you have a deep commitment to respectful relationships and respectful workplaces, so thank you. I want to say also that the Albanese Labor government takes this issue, as we all do, extremely seriously. It is without question that everyone has a right to be safe and respected in their workplace, a commitment we should all have. The fact that some workplaces have not been safe or respectful for so many Australians, particularly women, is completely, absolutely unacceptable. And it seems as outrageous both inside and outside of this place. The Respect at Work report found that 2 in 5 women had experienced sexual harassment in the past 5 years. It is not a laughing matter. It is not. And that's why that in the last 5 years, an absolutely appalling high number, and we all know that that must change. That is why we as a government will be introducing a bill to this House to implement 7 legislative changes recommended by the Sex Discrimination Commissioner, Kate Jenkins, and it will have proper oversight. This is a key part of our election commitment to implement the recommendations of the Respect at Work report, and we will do it in full. The passage of this bill will move Australia forward in our efforts to prevent workplace sexual harassment from happening in the first place. Ending workplace sexual harassment isn't just a safety issue. It's an economic one, and it is all of our business. The social and emotional cost of doing nothing costs the Australian economy not $3.8 million, but $3.8 billion a year. Loss of productivity, staff turnover and absenteeism. This legislation means that workplaces must take responsible and proportionate measures to eliminate sex discrimination, sexual harassment and victimisation as far as possible. I am proud to be a member of this government that will be bringing this legislation forward, and it builds on the things like reintroducing gender-responsive budgeting, developing a national strategy to achieve gender equality, and is what the Albanese Labor government stands for.
Non-indulgence, the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I want to join the opposition to the fine words of the Minister in her contribution then. This is a bipartisan piece of work, and I want to thank the government for the engagement with us, in particular with Senator Payne in Birmingham and others. This is a body of work that's gone on for a period of time and will continue to provide that support. There is zero tolerance for workplaces where people can't be treated with respect and where sexual harassment might take place. It's true in this building and it's true across the country, and we will work as a parliament together in a bipartisan way to make sure that we do have a safer and more respectful workplace so that people can enjoy the rights that they should enjoy without any hesitation or any condition whatsoever. And we've had this discussion with the government ongoing for a number of months now, and we will continue that work because it's important, as I say, for this parliament but across the broader society.
I give the call to the member for Durack.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Indigenous Australians. Labor's decision to scrap the cashless debit card will unleash an avalanche of drugs and alcohol into the most vulnerable communities. Mr Truss, Executive Chair of the Woonan Foundation in the East Kimberley, says he fears the extra cash on the streets would lead to a spike in alcohol-related harm. He says, "I think it could be chaos." Will the government take full responsibility for any spike in domestic violence or child neglect in Indigenous communities as a consequence of abolishing the cashless debit card?
Order. I give the call to the Minister for Indigenous Australians.
Can I just say up front that this commitment was an election policy, and it was an election policy that we took extremely seriously and done an enormous amount of consultation about, including with Mr Truss, who is in, of course, Western Australia. The cashless debit card diminishes people's self-worth. It is discriminatory and it's arbitrary. It is also very important to understand. If you want to hear this, then be quiet. It is also a piece of infrastructure policy that has been reviewed and reviewed and reviewed. It was a piece of technology that was used by a private organisation for profit. That is the truth of it. And the other part of it is that mandatory income management across the board has been a failure. You seem to all forget
The member for Forest will withdraw that comment.
Legislation.
The minister will resume her seat. The member for Forest will withdraw that comment.
Speaker.
The minister will continue with her answer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The other point is this, and this is very, very important, that this measure is voluntary. If people want to stay on the cashless debit card or income management, that is their decision. We have made sure that within this piece of legislation there is a voluntary component. There is also a component to the member for wherever you're from, that there is also within this legislation the component where people will be placed on income management if there is a court order against them, including child abuse, including domestic violence. So get to know what the legislation is about before you start asking those sort of questions. We do not believe in mandatory income management. It is voluntary, and there will be situations where there will be people placed on income management because of the particular circumstances they find themselves in. That is this legislation. We have listened to the voices, we have consulted, and we will be going forward on this.
Order. Member for Page. I give the call to the member for Werriwa.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Aged Care. After almost a decade of neglect in aged care, how is the Albanese Labor government reforming this sector and building a workforce to deliver the care that older Australians deserve?
Give the call to the Minister for Aged Care and Sport.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Werriwa for her question and take this opportunity to thank her for her continued efforts to look after the welfare and well-being of every single constituent in the electorate of Werriwa, and also her unquestioned, well-tested capability as a fellow twin mum. Now, this question is about what the Labor government is doing with respect to the aged care workforce, because we are committed to restoring humanity, to restoring dignity, to restoring quality and to restoring security to aged care, and that starts with restoring the value of the aged care workforce. Now, to this end, I was able to go visit the Bernie Bray Centre in Chermside recently. They have won the National Excellence Aged Service Award, and I think it's worth noting that they have managed to do that despite the fact that they were one of the many community organisations affected by the floods in Brisbane in February this year. They were able to do that despite things like floods affecting them, and they were able to do that despite 10 years of neglect from the previous federal government, who were deaf to the cries for help from residential facilities, from nursing homes, from home care workers and from the residents and families themselves. Residents need more carers with more time to care, and that is why the Albanese Labor government is bringing in 24/7 nurses. That is why the Albanese Labor government is bringing in more care minutes. That is why we are addressing the workforce shortages left by 10 years of neglect from this government. The previous government had these workforce shortages build year upon year upon year, did nothing about them, and then in the first week of the new parliament walked in and said, well, this seems to be a bit of a problem. What are you going to do about it? Every single person on the other side of the House should have done something with your time in government, and yet you didn't. You didn't. In fact, the first thing they did when they got their hands on the keys to power in late 2013 was cut the aged care workforce compact. They were so hungry to cut the pay of aged care workers, they suspended standing orders to do it. That's what they did. They were so hungry they suspended standing orders to cut pay of aged care workers. But here on this side of the House, one of the first things we did was make a submission to Fair Work to give them a pay rise. And in the first 100 days, we have committed not only to that work but to fully funding any decision of the Commission. We have held an aged care workforce round force where we got constructive ideas from the stakeholders ignored by the government for so many years, and we fed that directly into the Jobs Summit. And the initiatives that came out of the Jobs Summit will include measures to help aged care workforce shortages. We're going to increase permanent migration program ceiling. We're going to add an additional $1 billion in joint funding for fee-free TAFE, extend visas, enable people who are on the aged and veterans pension to earn an additional $4,000. Active ageing in action.
Has expired. I give the call to the member for Fowler.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. The government has seen a $50 billion windfall, mainly from Australian mineral and energy export royalties, and yet they are now asking ordinary, hard-working Australians to pay more in fuel with the increase in excise taxes this week. My constituents of Fowler want details on how part of that money will go towards fixing Australia's cost of living crisis that's hitting everyone, from students to pensioners and families, especially those in low socioeconomic and regional areas.
The call to the Treasurer.
Yeah, thanks very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Fowler for her question and for the conversations that we've been able to have about some of these important issues and some of these difficult issues in the Commonwealth budget. The final budget outcome, which will be released for last year tomorrow in this place by myself and the Finance Minister, Senator Gallagher, will show a welcome temporary improvement in the tax receipts for last year. And part of that—
Members on my left.
Yeah.
Members on my left will cease interjecting. The Treasurer will be heard in silence.
And a big part of the improvement in the bottom line for last financial year is an increase in the tax take. And part of that, we should acknowledge, is the fact that the increase in world energy prices has meant that there's been an increase in taxes collected. So, for example, for the benefit of honourable members and especially the member for Fowler, the last budget papers, including forecasts for the PRRT, for example, showed that receipts from the PRRT will increase 110% from $786 million in 2021 to $1.65 billion in 21-22, and a further 45% increase in 22-23. And so the premise of the member's question about an improvement in the budget for last year and the contribution made by world energy prices and some of our energy companies, I agree with. Those are some of the issues that we've made clear, including in the course of the last couple of weeks. And as the member for Fowler and I have discussed with colleagues on this side of the House as well and publicly, in my own community and communities around Australia, is that the reason that the fuel excise relief will come off tomorrow night is because it would cost about $3 billion for every 6 months of extension, so $6 billion a year, to extend the fuel excise relief that those opposite legislated to end tomorrow night. And we're being upfront with people about that. We know that's a difficult decision. We know it impacts people who drive further. But our commitment to them all along is to manage the budget as responsibly as we can, to provide cost-of-living relief where we can, where there's an economic dividend in areas like childcare, cheaper TAFE, cheaper medicines and getting wages moving again. But nobody is pretending that the end of the fuel excise relief won't make things more difficult. We understand that. We appreciate that. And we're being upfront with people the reason why that's ending on the timetable set by those opposite and why we're not able to extend it. But we are providing cost-of-living relief to the member for Fowler's constituents and to Australians all around the country. We'll do that in an affordable and responsible way that's right for the budget and right for the economy.
Give the call to the member for Lawler.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Government Services. How will the commencement today of the Royal Commission into Robodebt help to bring justice to the victims of Robodebt?
The call to the Minister for the National Disability Insurance Scheme and the Minister for Government Services.
I thank the member for Lawler for her question and her advocacy on behalf of Robodebt victims. For the information of the House, I was privileged to be in Brisbane this morning for the opening of the Robodebt Royal Commission. I was in the audience with Kath Madgwick and Jennifer Miller. Kath's son Jared took his own life after an argument with the previous government about the debt collection of a debt. Jennifer's son Reece took his own life. I congratulate the Royal Commission for starting this process in the course of 5 weeks. It's a remarkable effort. And what I thought I might do is take this opportunity to inform the member of Lawler and other members who are interested in Robodebt matters, including some of those on the opposition front bench, of the opening remarks by Her Honour, the Royal Commissioner. She said the premise for the scheme was unsound because it treated average earnings as though they were actual earnings. But that was most unlikely to be true, she said, unless the recipient earned the same amount every fortnight. The very circumstances which caused people to need benefits meant it was very improbable that many did. She went on at another point in her opening remarks and said that a good deal is known of how the Robodebt scheme operated, but not much has been revealed about why, about what advice or consultation or reasoning or response to criticism was occurring behind the scenes at any stage. She's made the point about people likely to be called as witnesses, that the focus appropriately and in accordance with the terms of reference will be those in senior positions who had or should have had oversight of it. Council Assisting Michael Gregory KC has given us some further understanding of who's likely to be called. Those involved in the design and implementation of the scheme. Those who are made aware of its risks, complaints, legal challenges and their responses. And I'll take that interjection from the opposition, where they try and say that everyone was doing it, so what was the problem? In fact, Her Honour went to this Liberal speaking points. She didn't call them that. She said what changed was the implementation of the Robodebt scheme in 2016 was that the Department of Human Services used an automated process to demand information from current and former recipients on a scale not previously attempted. And it further says that they sought the information going back years, and the department proceeded to use debt recovery powers without any further attempt to substantiate the alleged debt. This Royal Commission is important. It is about justice for people who are unlawfully treated by the then government. I have no doubt that this Royal Commission will make sure that the shame never happens again and those responsible will be held to account.
I give the call to the Manager of Opposition Business.
My question is to the Attorney-General. I refer to comments by the Chief Executive of Omni Bridgeway, Andrew Saker, who told the online industry magazine Law.com on 8 September that the Attorney-General's decision to relax restrictions on litigation funders would, quotes, provide us with more opportunities, close quotes. Does the Attorney-General agree that his decision will create more opportunities for litigation funders like Omni Bridgeway?
I give the call to the Attorney-General. Order, members on my left.
I thank the honourable member for his question, and as I told the House yesterday, I have complied with the Ministerial Code of Conduct at all times. I suggest that if the honourable member has questions for Omni Bridgeway, he should direct questions to that company.
Order. I give the call to the member for Boothby.
My question is to the Minister for Science. What was Australia's involvement in NASA's Project DART, which collided a spacecraft with an asteroid this morning? How does it showcase Australian scientists? And what are our Albanese Labor government's plans to leverage our scientific know-how?
The call to the Minister for Industry and Science.
Thanks, Mr Speaker, and thanks to the member for Boothby, not only for the question, but I had the pleasure of visiting the Tonsley Innovation Precinct at Flinders Uni and look forward to visiting there again. And, Mr Speaker, what occurred this morning at the, when I visited the Canberra Deep Space Communication Complex in Tidbinbilla. It's a NASA facility managed by the CSIRO. We witnessed the historic double asteroid redirection test, or DART for short. And what happened was a literal world first, humankind's first test of planetary defence. An incredible feat. Just imagine flinging an object the size of a fridge at the speed of 6.6 kilometres a second at an asteroid the size of a pyramid to slow it down or change its orbit, and doing it from 11 million kilometres away, which is just what happened at 9:14 a.m. our time. A mammoth achievement, and full and hearty congratulations for the global effort led by NASA. But across the chamber, can we congratulate the CSIRO team at Tidbinbilla, who played such a crucial role in the mission? They received the final signals from the DART spacecraft as it approached and impacted the asteroid. The CSIRO is rightly proud of the 85 people that work there, the scientific, engineering and tech nous, as we all are, and it was a great pleasure to visit it with the member for Bean, David Smith. What we saw today is a great example of how Australian know-how brought to life by skill is making a valuable contribution on the world stage, a testament to our strong scientific relationship with the US. And now the Albanese Labor government wants to rekindle our faith in Australian know-how. We're a smart people. We need to apply those smarts to drive national prosperity and well-being. And that's why I announced earlier today we'll be revitalising our national science priorities. We're a government that believes in the value of science and will act on science. Our national science priorities haven't been refreshed since 2015. A lot's happened in the world since that time, and we need a modernised framework. We want these refreshed priorities to reflect what the nation values, and we've identified 3 new priorities as a starting point: supporting stronger action on climate change, elevating and investing in First Nations knowledge, harnessing the potential of emerging technologies, not only for economic growth but Australian well-being. Now, we've published the terms of reference for this work, which will be led by our Chief Scientist, Dr Cathy Foley. We expect a new set of priorities and a statement within the next year. And importantly, I want to invite and listen to the advice and views of our nation's tremendous science and research community. We thank everyone at the CSIRO who contributed to today's great effort.
Give the call to the member for Bonner. Order.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Small Business. Can the minister inform the House how much a typical small business electricity bill is and whether electricity bills are becoming more expensive for small businesses?
I give the call to the Minister for Small Business, Housing and Homelessness.
Thank you, and I thank the member for his question. As, of course, I've said in this place before, we do understand that small businesses across Australia have had a tough time. We know that they've had a tough time, and we know that energy bills are increasing. What we also know, of course, is that side of the House didn't do anything about energy policy for more than a decade. We had a decade of denial and delay that caused energy prices to increase. We also, of course, had the former minister here who hid energy price increases from small businesses right across the country because they wouldn't tell small businesses before the election what their plans were for energy prices. We, of course, know—
I'll just allow the minister to resume her seat. I'll call the member for Bonner on a point of order.
A point of order on relevance, Mr Speaker. The first question was, can she inform us on the price of electricity for small
businesses?
I'll
bring the minister back to the question. It was about order, a specific question about how much an electricity bill will, and also energy prices becoming more expensive. So ask the minister to return back to the question. She's had a preamble.
And of course, we do know that small businesses are facing challenges and energy prices are one of them, which is why we're working with small businesses and we're busy implementing our election commitments to small business.
Order. Order. I give the call to the member for Macon.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, my question is to the Minister for the Environment and Water. How is the Albanese Labor government delivering on its commitment to protect our rivers and support our precious water resources?
Give the call to the Minister for the Environment and Water.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I want to thank the member for Macon for his question. I know that he, like all of our South Australian colleagues here, is absolutely committed to seeing the delivery of the Murray-Darling Basin Plan in full, because it matters. It matters for the communities along the river system. It matters for the businesses that depend on the river system, the farmers, the tourism operators, the other businesses, and of course it matters for the environment as well. Australia is already the driest inhabited continent on Earth, and we know that as climate change takes hold, this will only get worse. Of course, it's hard to remember at a time like this when so much of the East Coast in particular is suffering too much water, but we know in Australia, as sure as night follows day, that these wet periods will be followed once again by drought. And that's why I was so very disappointed to read in today's paper that the member for Maranoa believes that the Murray-Darling Basin Plan is impossible to deliver. That's actually a bit rich from someone who was in charge of the Murray-Darling Basin Plan for so many years. It would have been good to hear him say that when he was the actual minister. It's not that it's impossible to deliver, it's that those opposite have sabotaged the Murray-Darling Basin Plan. They've tied it up in brown tape because they never wanted to deliver it. And it's not just the Murray-Darling Basin Plan that they are determined not to deliver. despite the fact that there was $1.3 billion set aside for water efficiency. They haven't spent that. They haven't delivered it. It's also their damn promises.
Leader of the opposition will cease interjecting.
It was incredible, wasn't it, that the member for Maranoa, the member for New England, who I spend some very delightful times with at 6 a.m. on a Monday morning, went right around the country promising 100
Leader
dams.
of the Nationals will cease interjecting.
Dams they promised. They promised Hells Gate, they promised Dungowan Dam, they promised Paradise Dam, they promised Urana Dam, they promised Wyangala Dam, they promised Manton Dam, they promised Anu Swamp Dam. They promised 100 dams. Guess how many they delivered? Two. So, of the 450 gigalitres of additional environmental water, they delivered 2. Of the 100 dams they promised, they delivered 2. This mob are great at circling the country and making big promises to regional communities, but they're all hat and no cattle.
Call to the Acting Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I ask that further questions be placed on the notice board.
Give the call to the Leader of the House.
Mr Speaker, documents are tabled in accordance with the list circulated to honourable members earlier today. Full details of the documents will be recorded in the votes and proceedings.
Give the call to the Leader of the House.
And I declare that the Social Services and Other Legislation Amendment incentivising pensioners to downsize bill is referred to the Federation Chamber for further consideration.